Oh, do you have a thing on your screen which says you've got to give me permission to record?
Yeah,
okay, give me that permission. Oh, Okse, I've not got your image. So are you going to be sharing your image when it comes to it? Or did you email it to me?
No, I haven't emailed it yet, but I'll send it in. Do you want me to send it now?
If you send it me now on Facebook, I'll just pause the
Jal, is it?
Oh, forgive me. Jaleelah Galbraith. May I introduce Chris Okse Oxenbury?
Hello.
No.
Okse, you will just be known as Okse today, won't you?
Yeah, Okse. Just call me Okse. Yeah, that'd be good.
And Jaleelah, you're happy with Jaleelah or Jal?
Yeah, either's fine. I don't mind.
Excellent. You are both stand-up comedians who I've worked with, and that's the capacity in which I know you. But if you want to talk about, I've started doing my broadcaster voice already. The capacity in which I know I'm Alan Partridge without the irony. Totally. That is absolutely what I am. If you spot any accidental partridgeisms at any point, make a buzzer noise or say, aha. And we're going to take it from here. The format is, have you listened to one?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of chat with you. It might not be long. It depends if we find anything to chat about. Then I'm going to look at one of your pictures and the other guest will try and guess what it is. We'll describe it. Then we'll try and guess what it is or where it's from. A stab in the dark can be as wild and crazy a guess as we like. And then we're going to talk about whatever is inspired by seeing it. If we want to talk about the comics themselves, fine. A lot of the comics people are very comicsy. You know, it's all about the history of the person and they want to talk about the history of the comics. They really take the art form very seriously. And a lot of people, it inspired philosophical conversations or going off on a right tangent. All of these are appropriate and suitable. And I think it's going to be Jaleelah's picture we choose first because it's the one I've already got selected.
No problem.
Right. Hello, this podcast may, if you're lucky, include strong language and adult themes. It may not. Let's see what the next half hour holds. Hello and welcome to Comic Cuts, the panel show. My name's Kev F Sutherland. You might know me as a writer and artist for Beano, Marvel Comics, Oink, Red Dwarf, Doctor Who, Viz. I also do the Scottish falsetto sock puppet theatre. And you might know my graphic novel adaptations of Shakespeare. And you might know my graphic novel adaptations of Shakespeare, but you probably don't. My guests today talking comics are Jaleelah Galbraith and Okse.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Oh, and this is where I do the theme tune, and I do the theme tune live. I need to share audio. Comic Cuts. We're looking at a panel and we comprise a panel, and that's way too loud. Comic Cuts. We're looking at a panel and we comprise a panel. There's a few of us. So the panel sees a panel, then we talk about the comics from the panel we discuss, and we call it Comic Cuts. Be honest.
He was holding a coffin.
Yeah,
Okse is trying not to choke at the sound of my theme music.
Some Ribena went down the wrong way. I was like trying to hold this coffin.
Yeah, I've heard worse excuses. I've had dry gags when people hear that music.
They're the worst.
I've got two guests with me today who brought with them a panel from a comic or something close. We're going to see if we can identify it and talk about it. Maybe we and you will learn something about comics that we didn't already know, or maybe we'll just show off a bit and have an enjoyable chat. Let's see. Joining me from Bristol is Jaleelah Galbraith. Hello, Jaleelah.
Hello.
How's Bristol today?
Well, it was sunny and hot and humid, but I think it's about to storm. So it's all happening today. That's
the British summer. Now yeah, I know you, Jaleelah, as a stand-up. Oh, have you returned to live stand-up yet this summer?
I did. I had my first gig back on stage in front of people without a screen last Monday, and I've got a few more booked for this month. But I'm also doing Zoom because I still think that there is a place for both. So yeah.
How did you find the Zoom stand-up gigs compared to stand-up gigs?
I'll be honest, I kind of put them on the back burner last year because I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to like focus on surviving. And then I gave one a go and realized it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. Totally different. You've got to get used to a whole new way of producing a performance. but I think that it's really nice because it gives people who don't normally get a chance to go to live comedy that accessibility to comedy. So you've got a whole new audience waiting for you.
I think that's very true. My second guest is in the land of coughing. My second guest is in Okse. I'm thinking you're in Coventry. Am I wrong?
No, I was originally in Leamington Spa, la-di-da, and I've moved back to the Black Country. So I'm in the Starbridge area now, Dudley Way.
Oh, beautiful.
Hence the accent.
And have you got back onto the live stage?
Yes, I did a gig last Thursday. I was comparing, and it was good but weird, and I was quite forgetful, but everybody was quite forgiving.
It is difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
I used to find if you hadn't gigged for a week, I had forgotten entirely what it was I did. Not gigging for 18 months.
Yeah, it's like, because the thing is, it's like being that consistent all the time, and it just becomes like a natural flow, doesn't it? But then you go back on stage, and like I'm turning around to audience members who've seen me before. I'm like, what do I talk about? Oh, your mum, your Chinese mum. Okay, let's get back into the rhythm. That's fine.
That's a very dangerous thing. Talking to the audience, their reply is obviously going to be your mum. Jal, I'm noticing your tattoo. Didn't see this when we've spoken and worked together before because you weren't brandishing your wrists. But go on, Jaleelah, tell us about that tat.
So this tattoo is serotonin. So it is a lot of people who suffer from depression, because who knew there's a lot of comedians who suffer from depression. It is to remind me that happiness is just a chemical. So it's not elusive. I can have it. So it's a nice little reminder.
That's
wonderful. It's the
molecule
image of serotonin.
Excellent. Folks, sorry this is an audio podcast. Google the molecule of serotonin and you'll see the diagram that is on Jaleelah's wrist.
Bit like, depending on which way round, it does look a little bit like the spaceship from Red Dwarf.
It does, because one of the hexagons is larger than the other. So why is that?
So I do not know. I'm a comedian, not a chemist. But for those who don't want to Google it, yes, it looks like Red Dwarf spaceship.
Or 2 panels from Blockbusters.
Or, classic. Yes, it actually does. I've never thought that before. There you go. I'm going to think of it every time I look at my wrist now.
Oh, fantastic. You could put random letters in there for different days of the week.
We all know what letters would go in that.
We would have a P, wouldn't we? Okse, are you inked on your skin?
Yes, I have got some Chinese writing, and you probably think to yourself, a bit risky having Chinese writing at a tattoo artist's place, because they can write absolutely anything, couldn't they? But I've got Bat Ding Dai Seal, which is Cantonese for don't stop laughing. It's just to remind that, so it says don't stop laughing. But then when I had it, I was like, oh wow, that's really meaningful. But then I've realised it's Frankie Howard's catchphrase, isn't it? Don't stop laughing. And that's done by my mum. So my mum wrote that. So I know
your mum didn't do the actual tattooing.
No, she didn't do the actual tattooing, but she so basically I turned around to her, I said, Mum, can you write don't stop laughing in Chinese? So she wrote it down, and I was like, oh wow, that's brilliant. And then the next week I came back and was like, Mum, look, and she's like, what have you done that for? But now she's really she's really proud of it. She'll be like, show me your arm if we're in Chinese restaurants. And I have to get my arm out, and they start giggling.
Actually, yeah, what's the Chinese attitude to tattooing? Because I know the Japanese don't like them at all.
I thought the Japanese loved the tattoos.
I had a friend who was talking about going to Japan and being warned to cover up because they think you're a Yakuza.
Oh, yeah. And that's why, as well, Postman Pat didn't do well in Japan, because he's got 3 fingers and a thumb. Because if you'll notice that all Japanese characters, even if they're cutesy, they'll always have 4 fingers and a thumb. But if you have a little finger removed, that's a sign of being in the Yakuza. So there you go.
I didn't know this. Yeah, I've been to Japan and did not know that. So
if you look at Mario, you'd look at him and you'd go, oh, he's probably got 3 fingers and a thumb because he's a cutesy cartoon character. But you look at any of them, Sonic, Mario, whoever, they've all got 4 fingers and a thumb.
Listener at home, quick, Google Sonic, because in my mind, I'm seeing 3 fingers. Because Sonic was very famously based on Mickey Mouse, because they wanted to get the rights to Mickey Mouse, didn't get them, and so they made him into a hedgehog. But they added the finger. They kept the stupid gloves, but they added the finger.
Yeah. And like, as I say, like Postman Pat didn't reach out there because he's a three-fingered character as well.
Yeah, just Googled it. Sonic the Hedgehog hands. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1 thumb, 4 fingers.
There you go. Little
There you
factoid.
go.
Never let it be said that Comic Cuts is not educational. I have asked everyone on the panel to bring a panel to the panel. You should be able to see those images on the artwork for the podcast, depending where you get your podcasts from, or it'll be on my website, kevfcomicartist.com, or on my Twitter. But don't worry about seeing the images. You shouldn't need to see the images because we're going to be brilliant at describing them. The first image we're going to look at is the image that has been brought by Jaleelah Galbraith. With me 1 second. Can we all see that?
Yeah, that's my picture.
Yeah.
So, listener at home, we're looking at Jaleelah's picture. You can find it in the places that I've just. In fact, I'm going to do that paragraph again. You can see these images on our website, Kev F Comic Festival. Yeah. If you want to, you could look at this picture, but you don't need to because Okse and I are about to describe it. Okse, what are we looking at?
Okay, so we're looking at 2 teenage girls in the foreground, and they're having a bit of a chat, having a bit of a gossip. And in the background, you've got, is that a guy or a girl? Because I can't really, is that a ponytail at the back? It's a guy, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's a red-haired guy. Quite handsome, maybe a handsome fella, I think. Yeah.
Well, he's called Matt. The voice bubble
yeah.
says, yes, even Matt, a bow tie does something for him. If I can just describe the fact that there's 3 panels that we're looking at, a 3-panel sequence, line drawing with color added, and the voice bubbles are a very regimented shape of voice bubble. Yeah, carry on describing, please, Okse.
Okay, so so this one girl saying, if I say so myself, everyone in the choir looked terrific. So this was after the concert. And then, yes, even Matt, a bow tie does something for him. So obviously bow ties are cool. We all know that. And then the next panel is like this teacher who looks a bit mean. She looks a bit mean, doesn't she? Would you say, Kev?
Yeah, they've made her look stern. She's got
stern.
jet black hair. She's got pince-nez glasses. Well, no, half circle glasses, which are down her nose. She's doing a smile and a frown, slightly jokerish, actually, that expression. But the person she's talking to, headmistress, is smiley, blonde-haired, big, colourful earring.
And so I'll walk the girls back to St. Elmo's mistress. So she's like, she's obviously a fuddy-duddy, isn't she? She's like, well, she's trying a bit of a party pooper, wants to walk the girls back, doesn't she? She don't want to stop around and mingle. So she wants to head back. That's what I see. And then the fun one's like, not yet. The headmaster has organised a supper for the performers in the dining hall. So, you know, she's like the friendly one, isn't she? This blonde lady. And the girls are in the background, 4 girls looking on at this conversation. And so the next panel is the 4 girls, and is that Matt, is it there? Because I can't see.
Yeah, Matt, I think could be the one in the middle ground.
Yeah. And they're like, isn't this terrific? And creepy. Is it
creepy? Creepy's keeping a beady eye. Oh no, it might be creepy. You're quite right.
Creepy.
Sorry, the nature of the scan has made it a little harder for us to see.
So she's obviously like the Mr. Bronson or something, isn't she? She's like the stern teacher.
In more recent years, you would think that we were looking at a Harry Potter type head teacher because they're in school uniforms. They're in red school uniforms with white shirts, red ties, and they've even got a red jumper or red blazer. What's it called? Waistcoat underneath that red school blazer, which has got yellow fluting on it. So very traditional public school or older grammar school type uniform. The girls have all got short black skirts as well. We're not in Hoodie Town for this. The teacher that's looking on would be Snape. I was immediately seeing Severus Snape's hair because we've got a centre parting and we've got it turning out at the back, looking a little bit like a mullet. Yeah. In fact, do you know what? I'm going to guess at the year of this being the decade of the mullets. I think this comic might come from the 1980s. Okse, can you have a guess at what it might be and where it's from?
I've got 2 older sisters, And this reminds me of the comics that I used to have to run down to the newsagents and get with a copy of something like this and a packet of bonbons. And I'm thinking like 80s, we're talking like Mandy comic or something like that. Is it sort of like that sort of?
Well, Jaleelah's not going to tell us yet. Okay. Mandy's a good guess. Jackie, I think, might be an even better bet because we're looking at full color. This has been watercolored, and the DC Thompson comics, and DC Thompson did the most popular and best known of the girls' comics. They printed in color. Jackie was in color. I think Bunty latterly was in color. The annuals and the summer specials would always be in color, of course. Go on. You've guessed at a title. I'll say The Bunty and say that it's from a Bunty summer special. Jaleelah, tell us what we're looking at.
So it is Bunty. I will be honest, I don't know the exact decade that this panel is from, just because the comic itself was 1958 until 2001.
Yeah.
And this is from the Four Marys. And it was in the Bunty for the whole period. And it was already, so I was in the 90s reading this, and they never really updated it. It still was quite retro. So it went from being of the time, and then they kept it in that period, it felt. And then by the time I was reading it in the 90s, it felt like a retro story. And I did exactly the same. I would get it from my local newsagents, and I would purchase it on a Saturday with some sweets.
Yeah.
And I would go to my bedroom and read this. And so the Four Marys that this is from, about four friends who were all called Mary, and how they all went by their surnames. So they all had nicknames for their surnames, and they all came from different financial backgrounds. And then they all went to this boarding school called St. Elmo's. So yes, Creefy was the teacher, Miss Creef, and she was the one who was really mean and stern. And they had a lot of lovely other nicer teachers, and they were always being misunderstood and getting into scrapes and what have you. And so they've clearly done a concert with the boys' boarding school, which would have been quite exciting considering they didn't get to mix with boys. So yes, a bow tie has impressed them on the neck of Matt. But I loved this comic, and the Four Marys, even though obviously I've not read this comic for years and years, the Four Marys to me was just a massive part of my childhood.
Now, it's interesting. Are they aspirational? Do you identify with a particular character, or do they do any sort of wish fulfillment? Do they solve big crimes and problems?
It was, I think, in certain stories they did more, like you said, in the annuals and what have you, because they'd have the annual that was normally the hard copy one at Christmas, and then in the summer they would do, it was little square, very thin paper booklets where you'd have a much longer version of the story. But a lot of it was quite Mallory Towers-ish. So to do with games and other academies that they were up against, and
lurking around at night in corridors and having
absolutely exactly, and trying to basically not run into teachers because they'd get into trouble for doing the simplest of things. But I think three of the girls were meant to be from well-to-do backgrounds, and then there was one working class girl who was on a scholarship.
Wow.
So
is she the one that we, the reader, are supposed to identify with, do you think?
So the magazine itself was for working class girls. It was meant to be, and so yes, I think the fact it had a boarding school story was meant to be quite aspirational. But yes, you had that character that you were meant to be able to relate to. But the story itself always kind of featured the four of them quite evenly. But that character is probably the one that you were meant to feel you would most likely be like in real life. And that's why you'd end up in that situation.
Is this sort of school fiction very much a British thing? Because I can think, as we've been talking about these, I've been thinking of things like Billy Bunter and Bessie Bunter, who appears in the logo for Comic Cuts, the panel show. That's Bessie Bunter's left eye that you can see in our main image. But they were set in posh schools. And there was an awful lot of that. I don't know if the Americans have that, because we had Wacko, was a TV series, but there was also a comic adaptation of that. I read a thing in Lion comic called Tales of Tollgate School. And in one of the first humour comics that I did at the end of the 80s, start of the 90s, I did Tales of Nambygate, which was a direct parody of this comic strip, even though I knew nobody had seen this particular one. But I knew there were loads of them. They were all set in blazers and school uniformed schools, and most of them were posh schools. But surely most of the readers didn't go to posh schools. Did the Americans do this?
I've never heard of a panel like a comic, American comic set in a high school in that era, like that sort of 80s era. I think it's a very British thing, isn't it, to do the whole school thing.
To have that boarding school. The American kind of cliche thing is to have high schools with all your stock characters. Yeah.
Archie comics. Yeah.
Comics are very school orientated.
And their schools are much more egalitarian right from the start, right from the 1940s, I think, when the Archie comic starts. Everybody in America goes to normal schools. It's a very, very small, well, actually, it's a very, very small minority that go to posh schools here. But for some reason, the minority that go to posh schools get all the stories written about them and buy them. But in America, very different. Yes, Archie is all high school. Happy Days, high school, welcome back, Cotter.
They've brought it back now, haven't they? They've brought Archie. Archie's actually out. They've brought it out again, haven't they?
Well, Riverdale does Archie on TV, but the Archie comics still, I think they do some that look modernized, but do they not still do the Archie comics that look like it's the 50s?
I don't think they do. You know, I've not seen any.
Hey, it's not until somebody brings it. It's not until somebody brings an Archie comic onto this show that I'm going to learn anything more about Archie than I knew as a kid. Because Archie was one of those things that just looked the same every time you picked it up. Which I suppose is a good thing. I mean, that's the thing with the Four Marys. This panel that we're looking at, these three panels that we're looking at, are from, I'm guessing, the 1980s. And there's an artist whose name is springing to mind called Barry Mitchell. The faces in the third panel look like Barry Mitchell's drawing. He also did a few little things in 2000 AD, but would be best known for working on the action comics like Action, and he also worked in Battle, and sometimes worked for DC Thompson, sometimes worked for IPC. The thing is, we've got no way of knowing who drew this panel because these DC Thompson comics, like the Bunty, were anonymous. I think
that Barry Mitchell, he either did panels for Bunty as a whole, and I think because of how long it went on for, I do think somebody else took over and had to basically copy their style. So I think sometimes, I could be wrong, but from the bits I've read, I think sometimes Barry Mitchell gets accredited for doing the later ones when he didn't. And it was because they had a couple other people basically drawing in the same style.
If we wanted to, we could frantically Google and have these facts at our fingertips. Do you want to frantically Google?
So, well, it says on Wikipedia, it does say Barry Mitchell. His name is in red, which means there's no page that you can click on. But I did end up on a forum, but I can't find that link anymore. And there was somebody talking about how they said that they had worked for Bunty and they had taken over the Four Marys.
Right.
I can't remember that person's name.
Yeah, that's not impossible. I'm sorry, I'm not going to Google while we're talking. I'm just going to go from my incredibly comprehensive memory of knowing nothing about the Four Marys, except that their lasting influence, these girls' comic strips. What was always the case was that girls were big and voracious readers. Girls remain big and voracious readers, and the style of material that would be consumed was polar opposites, certainly in the comics world, from what was being supplied to boys. Boys were being given adventure and girls were being given a much broader range, weren't they?
Yeah, I've got two older brothers, and that's why I got into comics, because one of them was always reading the obvious, Desperate Dan and the Beano, and I used to read those. And then when I would go with him to the newsagents, I think that's when I started getting Bunty, because then I saw that there was comics for girls. But I carried on reading all the Beanos and what have you, but Bunty was like mine. That was my thing that on a Saturday I would go and get. And yeah, it was more domestic. You'd get some sort of adventures, but they'd be one-off stories in the comic, but the serials were always more, even with the Four Marys, they were never massive peril compared to other storylines that I know my brothers were reading.
That gender divide was very much a thing of publishing of the 50s and 60s, 70s. Would they do it now? Would you bring out a comic for boys and a comic for girls?
No.
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 And you don't need to. You don't even need to now.
Did you need to then?
You didn't need to then, but I think I understand more where it was coming from back then. I don't think I even noticed, though, to be honest. I used to think of the Beano as just my brother's comic. I never thought of it as a boy's comic because I read it as well. But I do think it was definitely, it wasn't aimed at me in the 90s.
When it came to collecting them up, I actually kept my sister's comic because that's the one thing she didn't have. She didn't have the hoarding gene. So I kept her. June and School Friend was the one she got very early on. The Princess Tina's we didn't keep. They went into some big recycling drive. But yeah, I had all of her Junes, and they were great comics because you would get humorous stories and they would be really well written, they'd be really well drawn. A lot of the boys comics sometimes didn't compare because they would be of a muchness in they were covering the same territory. Certainly you didn't get, there was one story in one of her comics which was about escaping from a concentration camp.
Wow.
And this is intended for 8-year-old girls. That was their war story. And there would be quite a lot of things about cripples who took up ballet dancing. I think that might be a caricature I made up in my mind subsequently. But yeah, they'd be domestic and much more down to earth quite often.
Bunty also had in the 90s, because the other story that I always remember, it was the ongoing serial in Bunty, was called Love Lisa. And it was photographs. So there was a teenage girl, and it was literally about a teenage girl. I think the main recurring characters were her mum and her brother. She had a dog, and then there would be there'd be a sister and sometimes a dad, sometimes grandparents. And it was that she was always writing in her diary. But yeah, it was, rather than cartoons, it was photographs with speech bubbles. And I don't think there were many other comics that were doing. I say this, I know nothing about comics, but I just remember that being like a really big thing about Bunty, was they had this photographic story.
In this country, it was the DC Thompson comics that pioneered the photo story. I think it's Jackie has the first photo stories, and then a number of publishers were doing them, especially through the 80s. In the 80s, with things like Oh Boy, you'll find George Michael and the members of Spandau Ballet and Simon Le Bon, before they were famous, posing as models for the photo strips. The term for it is fumetti.
Okay.
It's from Italian. It means smoke. I don't know why smoke should mean photo stories, but it does. And the Italians did the photo stories first, and it caught on in the 1960s or 70s over here. Do you think they could bring the Four Marys back?
Yeah, because when you think of the fact you've got Harry Potter, and there's a nostalgia about, I say that, I worked in a boarding school in the last few years, so I know they're still around, I know what they're like, but I think there's a romanticism about them, and I think Harry Potter has shown that side of education, so I definitely think you can. Of course, it would have to be updated in what the girls' aspirations were and are, and the way the teachers treat them and things like that, but definitely I think you could.
Yeah, I was trying to think of any TV shows that were along the lines of these kind of Bunty stories, and the one that I can picture is Call the Midwife. Call the Midwife is like a Bunty comic, but now.
Yeah, you're right, it is. And there was The Worst Witch I used to watch, and that was also obviously like a fantasy story, but that was also set in a boarding school, obviously a witch's boarding school. But I don't think boarding school, the storyline has been put up away on a shelf, never to return. So yeah, the Four Marys, it would be very niche, and I think it would either have to be updated for a brand new audience, or it would be something that people would watch because they remember it from Bunty. Yeah,
it'd be very hard to do without making these socio-political points about it. I remember when the Comic Strip Presents, and God, this is 40 years ago, the Comic Strip Presents did the parodies of the famous Five Go Mad on Mescaline, and the previous one. And they were making a lot about the fact that these were posh stereotypes. They were being performed by, what was it, Ade Edmondson, Peter Richardson, Jennifer Saunders, and Dawn French, who you can't get much posher than.
I just remember bits and bobs of it, and I think I saw clips of it when I was actually reading Enid Blyton, and so I don't think I appreciated what they were taking the mick out of. But yeah, absolutely, that again is a big part of my childhood. It's nostalgia that sells things. So
I think it probably would. We've just been looking at the Four Marys from Bunty Comics, suggested by Jaleelah Galbraith. Thank you, Jaleelah. Shall we have a look now at what has been suggested by Chris Okse Oxenbury? Bear with me. This will take me a second.
See, I'm nervous because you said you thought it was that it might be a bit too obvious, but because I know nothing about comics, I bet you I won't get it.
Oh, you will. You will.
Will I? Unless it's got the title in the middle of it. I hope I do.
Okay. Let's see.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we're looking at it now. Innocent listener at home, if you want to see the image, you should be able to see it on the episode image for the podcast, depending where you get the podcasts from, or it's on my website, kevfcomicartist.com, or on my Twitter, but you don't need to see it because this image is about to be described by Jaleelah Galbraith. Jaleelah, what are we looking at?
Okay, so, shall I say who I think that is?
It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to skirt round it.
I'm going to say that is Superman with his red cape and his Elvis black hair with quiff and his red pants, red boots, and then gold belt and blue all-in-one leotard and throbbing muscles. And he is being punched in the face by... I'll be honest, am I meant to know that person? Because that person, I don't, well, there's a name that's familiar, but I don't think it's the same person.
You are meant to know that person, but it's interesting you don't instantly recognize it. For the benefit of the panelologists at home who study this kind of thing, if you're a comics fan, you will actually know what this image is. It's a comic strip in full color with two superhero figures that you'll instantly recognize. We're looking at one main image and three smaller images below. It's from such an iconic comic that I'm struggling to backpedal and describe it as if I've never seen it before. But very interestingly, Jaleelah has recognized Superman, who's being punched in the face with a broad swipe, which is going from the puncher's right to left, taking the whole width of the page to get the dynamism of that punch across. But the guy who's doing the punching, and he's wearing a cape, and he's got a sort of pointy-nosed cowl with, just out of shot, pointy ears at the top, but it's slightly armored. Jaleelah, can you not guess who that guy is?
Well, I think that is Batman.
It is Batman.
It is Batman, which is what I thought, because also it says Bruce. Superman tells him as he grabs his next punch, Bruce, this is idiotic. Next caption, you're just bone and meat like all the rest. And then he rips his helmet off. But because I wasn't expecting there to be those big gloves with the metal kind of Wolverine style metal on the gloves, that's what put me off. But yeah, Batman punching Superman.
Yeah, and it's no problem for me to guess where it's from. Jaleelah, have a guess at what comic it might come from. It might come from a special story told with these characters in their own comic. I've not made that easy, have I?
You've not made it. And
pull a title out of the ether.
I'm just going to call it Superman and Friends, because I do not. Just DC comic. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. That's
okay, because this is good. You're in the position that most people in the world would be. Those of us who've been reading comics all our life, and I got this when it was brand new, will recognize The Dark Knight Returns, written and drawn by Frank Miller and inked by Klaus Janson. I can even tell you that it was colored by Lynn Varley. That's knowing too much. But it's one of those comics about which comic fans, it's kind of a touchstone, isn't it, Okse?
Oh, I absolutely love it. I remember going to Nostalgia and Comics in Birmingham when I was about, so this came out in 1986. I remember going into like Nostalgia and Comics, this big comic book shop. Years ago, me and my mum and dad used to drive around Birmingham. You know, we'd go, should we go for a drive? And we'd drive around Birmingham, and I'd see this sign, it'd say Nostalgia and Comics, and there was a picture of Spider-Man, and there's a picture of Mickey Mouse either side of it. And I always used to think to myself, what is that? What is that? what does nostalgia mean? I know what comics means. I don't know what nostalgia is.
Oh, brilliant.
And we used to go past it. And then as I grew older and became like a teenager, I was allowed to catch the bus into Birmingham. And then I got there and I walked in and there was all these comic books everywhere. And Frank Dark Knight Returns just like stood out. It was just like this iconic silhouette of Batman with the lightning bolt going through it. And it's like, oh, so I picked it up. And then I looked at the back and it was like £7.95. And like £7.95 when I've been paying like 10 pence for like Beanos and Dandies and stuff. £7.95 was a lot of money. I don't know if you remember that, Kev. £7.95.
Yeah. Well, this whole thing, that graphic novel, it originally came out in floppy comics, but then it was collected up into what we call in the business a trade paperback, but which most people would know as a graphic novel. One story collected up, it's about 150, sometimes 200 pages. And this was DC Comics. But in 1986, it really was a paradigm shift because, as you say, floppy comics were cheap. You'd get your regular monthly American floppy comics, your regular British floppy comics. Yeah. When I was getting them in the 1970s, they were 10p, which was an easy price to remember. They crept up during the 80s. By 1986, I don't know, they might have been 30p by then, 30 or 40p, but $7.99, that was unbelievable. That was more than you would pay for a record.
2 weeks pocket money. 2 or 3 weeks pocket money gathered up to say I'd have to save up for that, but I managed it. I saved up and I bought it, and it's one of my treasured possessions. It's just such a beautiful book. You know, it's rough, it's ready, isn't it? It's like some of the images in there, they're not the best, but there's some brilliant stuff. And
I've always been very critical of Frank Miller's draftsmanship. He's not the best figure artist, but that wasn't his point, was it? He found new ways of telling stories.
Yeah, and I love that costume, like unrecognizable to Jal, but like it's like iconic, isn't it? It's like it's that metal costume, the costume that he put together to beat Batman, beat Superman, and I love that whole concept.
It is very interesting because, Jaleelah, you weren't recognizing Batman because he's wearing these heavy layers of armor. In the films, and especially Batman versus Superman with Ben Affleck, they have drawn on this imagery for the designs of their costumes. But it's not the stuff that's stuck in the memory because it wasn't a great film, whereas this was a great comic. Nowadays, if you go around a toy store, you will see there's 50 different outfits for Batman. Back when we were kids, the toy companies had to make them up. They had to make up a bat bike and a bat copter. I used to have a bat copter when I was 3 years old. That would have been Adam West would have been piloting that. But of course, it never existed in the comics and it never existed in the movies. But now there's a symbiosis, isn't there? You design them for a movie or for a comic, but a movie especially, because you're going to sell toys.
Yeah, because you get like thermo. Like the Batman animated series, you'd have like thermo Batman, and he'd have like an orange costume with a flamethrower or something in the toy department, and you'd be like, "What is this? This isn't Batman." But they've got to sell toys. That's what it's all about. At the end of the day, this really went against the grain. Having Batman in a costume in armor like that really went against the grain of the whole Batman thing. And it sort of like went into descriptions of why he has the target on his chest, why he has the bat symbol on his chest. It's so that, you know, when the baddies see him, they go straight for that symbol when they shoot him, and that's where he's got all his armor. It's, you know, there's some little really great bat facts in there.
Well, the 1980s comics like this and Alan Moore and Brian Bolland's Killing Joke and Alan Moore's Superman story, whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, is that what it's called? And what happened to the Man of Tomorrow, and what do you get for the Man Who Has Everything? They were the first meta stories, really, the first stories where serious writers looked at superhero comics and looked at superhero designs and said, hang on, that's a bit silly, he's got a target on his chest, let's now examine this as if we were serious writers, examine this like we were filmmakers, because back in the 90s they still weren't taken seriously, were they? Comics were still light entertainment intended for 8 to 12-year-olds to read, and to do something like this was really taking a risk.
Oh yeah, it's like you've got like the Joker with the batarang in his eye, you know, really vivid, horrific imagery, but absolutely brilliant. Loved it.
I mean, Jaleelah, when you're picturing Batman, what sort of Batman are you picturing?
I do see I either see the brand new version, or I think way back when, and I think the TV series.
Yeah.
So it's either one extreme to the other. And it was, the thing is, because I don't know anything about comics, and a lot of my friends are really into superheroes and things and do take the mick out of, I don't know the world. I don't know who's against who, how anyone, I don't know who got bitten by what to become who they are. So I was scared to say that was Batman, because I thought that's too simple. It says Bruce and he's got some pointy ears. But yeah, because I don't know the comics, I didn't know that he had that armor. And I also didn't know that, I mean, is his hair normally white, or is it just white there?
He's very old in this one.
This is a story. This is a story set a number of years in the future, although, of course, the timelines of comics are pretty movable. But this is Batman has got old and retired, and Superman doesn't age, and then Batman returns. It's called The Dark Knight Returns. So this old man comes out of retirement. He has to build a big suit to give him the power to do what he used to do when he was a kid. And he confronts a darker world, which has become... everything's gone to shit since he was Batman back in the day. Of course, nowadays, present day Gotham is as bad as the future Gotham they envisaged for The Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah, and that's why he's one of like the darkest.
Superman works for the government, doesn't he? He works for the man and that sort of thing.
Well, comics have got more and more dystopian. Do you think there might be a turnaround and comics could become cheerful and jolly once more?
No,
I think the four Marys are more likely to end up in an absolutely post-apocalyptic world than Superman and Batman are going to end up in a
I'd love to see a Four Marys and Batman crossover.
Me too.
Yeah,
I would like it that he rocks up as their new headmaster.
Yeah.
And it ends up as some sort of Avengers thing where he just trains each and every one of them to have a superpower.
And creepily falls in a vat of acid.
Yeah. And that's the thing. This is what I love about this cartoon here, is that I love the fact that, I mean, of course, this is such an obvious comparison, but it looks so much like a storyboard for a film. You can absolutely imagine seeing it cut from that wide shot with that incredible boomph to the face by Batman, and then it's that close-up of Superman grabbing his wrist, and then an extreme close shot with the hand with the line over it, and then you pull back out and you see Superman take off the helmet from Batman. It's just, I love just how dramatic it is.
Yeah, it's a really powerful shot. I love it.
It was comics like this that really made them realize, and the comics that followed this, that made the filmmakers realize they could do films based on superheroes and an audience would take them seriously. They wouldn't just have to be for very young kids anymore.
I remember getting so excited when I found out they were doing like a Batman movie with when I found out it was like Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. I was so excited. And years ago, I don't know if you remember, Kev, they used to have like Sunday supplements. Do you remember the Sunday supplements with the newspapers?
I do.
I remember there being like some spy footage of the new Batman film.
Yeah.
I remember like cutting it out and like putting it in a scrapbook. But nowadays, you just go on the internet.
Oh, and it's all there for you. Yeah.
It's all there for you. But like when we were young, when me and Kev were younger, a little snippet like that was like gold, wasn't it? But now it's just so freely available for all of us.
Trying to avoid a spoiler nowadays is your uphill struggle, isn't it?
Yeah.
But also what I can imagine is, I mean, when I remember me reading the Bunty, I would, like I said, I'd go get some sweets, go to my bedroom and just, quietly for a good hour or so, properly turn each page. And I can imagine, though, that these stories, you just whip through that book because it's so fast paced and the pictures are so dynamic and energetic that you are just racing through that story to find out what happens, whereas obviously the stories in Bunty were a bit more sedate.
And would you have to wait a week or 2 weeks? Was it fortnightly or monthly?
For Bunty, do you know what? Weekly. It was, I think it was every, I want to say Monday, but I would get it the following Saturday. And I used to love it if I went on holiday because then I'd come home and there would be 3 waiting for me.
A graphic novel's worth.
That's the thing I was going to say. And but also I guess you wouldn't want to, with a graphic novel, you also don't want to rip through it too fast because there isn't then another weekly catch up. So you kind of want to milk it, but also the energy of the story is going to make you go straight through like page by page.
It would be very interesting to see if the Four Marys would merit collecting up into a graphic novel or trade paperback format, because I think they would. I think they were readable. I know that a number of the writers who wrote on those DC Thompson comics included Jacqueline Wilson, who worked on Jackie, and John Wagner and Pat Mills and Alan Grant, who all went on to be the lead writers of 2000 AD comic. Judge Dredd was created by writers from the Bunty. So very interesting to see those collected up. At the moment, I don't think DC Thompson are making paperback collections of things like the Four Mary and their Bunty strips, but they should. DC Thompson, if you're listening, you know what to do.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I'd get it. I love that.
We have been looking at The Dark Knight by Frank Miller and the Four Marys from Bunty Comics, selected by Okse and Jaleelah Galbraith. If you want to find out more, hang on. If you enjoyed this conversation and have any questions, you can find us all on our various social media. Jaleelah, where do we find you?
I'm on all the socials as @JalGalActor, all the same on all socials.
And Okse?
You can either find me on @Okse, spelled OKSE. I used to spell it OXY, but then they brought out the spot cream. So that's OKSE. Or you can see me on you can even catch me on The Art of Okse. So I use two usernames, Okse and The Art of Okse. So I've got my Instagram and my Twitter and all sorts.
And I'm on Twitter @Kev F Comic Artist and the website kevfcomicartist.com. Please click subscribe to be sure of hearing every episode when it comes out. Thanks again to Jaleelah Galbraith and to Okse and to you at home for listening. I've been Kev F, and this has been Comic Cuts, the panel show. And we're out.
Hey, that was really nice. I enjoyed that, Joel.
That was so interesting, honestly, because like there were so many comedians doing podcasts, and I've done like 3 about horror. And yeah, like a comic one, I think is really it's a really nice change.
My starting point was that I obviously I talk to comics about my mates, and a couple of the friends who we do the Zoom things with, we're big comics fans, and we say, oh, we're going to turn our conversation into a podcast. And then he said, oh, there's loads of comics podcasts. And I looked at all the comics podcasts, almost entirely American. They're American, or they're 2000 AD comic, and they're very spoddy. They're very all about the arcane details of that comic that everybody listening reads, and they're not interested about the outside world. I'm interested in the outside world, and obviously as broad a range as possible, and particularly British comics, which I couldn't see getting a look in at all. So that was
I thought I loved it. I was a bit nervous about it because I thought, oh, I've picked such an obvious thing, and but now I really enjoyed that because it's sort of like brings back memories, doesn't it? It's like, as I was saying, going to the driving around Birmingham and going to the comic shop and stuff like that. And I think it's really good that, as you say, like bringing British comics into it. That's brilliant. And my sister, my former sister-in-law, I don't like to say ex because it sounds, she used to read the Bunty all the time. So in the 90s, we'd watch Gladiators, and then she'd have like pick up a copy of the Bunty.
And that's the thing, like Kev, when you messaged me and you were like, are you into comics? And straight away I was like, Bunty. That was my thing. So it's really nice to talk about.
And also, not being heavily into comics, any piece of art should inspire conversation that's not just about the art. You don't go into a gallery and then have to go through Picasso's Wikipedia page. You just say, that's not very good. His later stuff is just phoning it in. But that's me.
Everyone's got a reaction to something, so it's cool.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Loved it.
Fabulous. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for your time. That will be coming out end of June or sometime into July, because I'm doing them one a week.
No worries, mate.
Thanks for inviting me.
And I'll let you know. Thank you so much for agreeing. Cheers, guys.
All right then. See you soon. Take care. Bye. Bye.